Hey AP Lang teachers, Beth Hall here from Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 different activities that I do with my students in order to introduce or reinforce synthesis skills. Before I share the activities, please take a second to subscribe if you haven't already done so. That way you won't miss any of my upcoming teacher tip videos or my student-friendly tutorials to help students prepare for the AP Lang exam. Also, don't forget to check out Coach Hall Writes on TikTok if you happen to be a TikTok user. If your students are on TikTok, please let them know that I share tips on that platform as well. And also, if you're looking for more information about the activities that I mentioned in this video, I'll include a blog post in the description that goes into a little bit more detail. The first activity I want to share with you is one that is pretty popular among AP Lang teachers, and that is the synthesis dinner party. Now, I don't want to take credit for this idea because I've seen several other teachers talking about it, but this is definitely a great way to get students to start to understand the concept of a conversation of sources. So I like to see students cite at least 2 sources per body paragraph. I want them to realize that the sources relate to each other rather than having just one source spread out among 3 different body paragraphs. To me, those essays tend to seem a little bit more disjointed. So one way to get students to realize that the sources overlap, either because they have similarities or maybe they contradict each other, one way to do this is to have them seat the sources as if it were a dinner party. Now, you might have to explain the concept of a dinner party to your students. My students, most of them haven't been to a formal dinner party, but some of them have attended weddings where there was a seating chart. Others have family gatherings where certain relatives have to sit on opposite ends of the table. And then, of course, there's the high school lunchroom where sometimes students kind of have to create their own seating chart based on different social groups and who is friends with whom and all that. So don't worry, students understand the concept even if they haven't been to a formal dinner party. I like to do the activity digitally, so I make this on Google Slides. I gave you a quick example here. It's not really difficult to do it on Google Slides. Basically, what I like to do is I like to insert a rectangle as the table, and that's where I type the prompt. I like to rephrase the prompt in the form of a question. If there are 6 sources, then I put 6 boxes around the table. Those are the seats, and then I have students seat the sources, creating their seating chart. Now, you don't have to do this digitally. You can also do it on regular paper. You can also make this way cuter than what I've done here. I've seen teachers add different graphics. They've made an invitation for their students. I've even seen some teachers actually put tablecloths on the tables in their classroom and have students kind of act out a dinner party as if they were the sources. So you can make this a super basic activity like I tend to do, or you can go all out if you want to. Now, if your synthesis prompt has 7 or 8 sources, you would just add extra seats to the table. One tip for you is to have your students determine which sources should sit at the ends of the table first, then have them fill in the other sources. So the first time that I have students do this activity, I typically have them work with a partner or small group, and I ask them to just figure out which sources they think belong at the ends of the table. I tell them to ignore the other seats for a second, just focus on the ends. I also tell my students that as they're seating sources at the ends of the table, these are probably going to be the 2 sources that they think contradict each other the most. And I'll ask them why. Why would you put contradictory sources at opposite ends of the table? And then students kind of say something like, well, it's because we don't want them to argue, so we want to put them far apart. So students do get the idea. Then what I have them do is I have them tell me which sources they chose. Usually there's a group consensus. Sometimes the students will agree on one source, like let's say everyone chooses source E, but then for the other end of the table, maybe half the class chooses A and half the class chooses B. That's totally fine, but I love to have students explain their reasoning so that way we can see how other students are interpreting the sources. Because the great thing about this activity is there's not really a right or wrong answer as long as students can explain their rationale. Once students have seated their sources at the opposite ends of the table, then I have them work with their partner or their group to fill in the other seats. Sometimes students struggle with neutral sources, so I tell them to seat these last. So maybe there's a source that shares both the pros and cons of an issue, or maybe it's a chart that's somewhat neutral, or a photograph that's pretty neutral. I tell them to worry about those last because they want to look for different similarities. So, which sources are most similar to the ones at either end of the table? Seat those first so that they could have a polite, civil dinner party conversation. And then the ones that are a bit more neutral, fill those in last. After students have completed their seating chart, I like to have them share their rationale with the class. I also sometimes have students write a brief paragraph explaining why they arranged the sources that way. This helps students explain the rationale to me. It helps them practice making a claim, and it helps me understand how well they understood the sources. These paragraphs are usually pretty short, so I basically just have them explain the arrangement. So they would say something like, we put sources A and E at opposite ends of the table because, and then they would say why. And then they might say, we sat source B next to source A because, and they would explain why. So we're not looking for this super sophisticated paragraph in terms of their word choice and syntax and things like that. I just want to know why they put the sources in that particular order. The second activity I want to share with you is pretty simple, but it is to make a T-chart. This is actually something that students can do on the exam if they're looking for a way to organize the sources and organize their ideas. Recently, my students did a prompt about whether kindergarten should be transformed into a more academic environment. So after we read and discussed the sources together, then I had students work with a partner or small group to make a T-chart. On one side of the T-chart, I wanted them to list reasons why kindergarten should be a more academic environment. And on the other side of the T-chart, I wanted reasons why kindergarten should not be a more academic environment. As students were listing their reasons, I encouraged them to put a source if they had a certain source they were thinking of. So some of their bullet points had one source, some had a couple sources. So this is another way to bring up that conversation of sources because students could see which sources relate to each other. It also helps them start to figure out what they want their main ideas to be. After I've given students time to complete the T-chart with their partner or small group, then we make one as a class. So I have students share out their bullet points and which sources they attribute that bullet point to. And then I write it on the board and we make one as a class. And I let students add to their own T-chart as well. That way they can learn from each other because maybe one group had a bullet point or a reason that they didn't have. So we want to make sure that we're allowing students to expand on their initial ideas. But I like the idea of this being an independent or partner small group activity first before we move to whole class. This next activity is one that can be done in isolation, meaning you can do this for pretty much any synthesis or argument prompt that you want to. I often like to have this be part 2 after students make a T-chart. So typically that takes about half a class. And then for the second half of class, I have students work with their partner or small group to write a claim. So I write the prompt in the form of a question on my dry erase board, and I make a continuum, the double-sided arrow there. So you can see in this example, it says, to what extent should kindergarten be transformed into a more academic environment? So on one side, we have little to no change, and on the other side, we have significant change. I have students write a claim or a thesis in response to the question. Sometimes students like to work independently, other times they work with a partner. Usually I don't allow more than 3 students to work together for an activity like this just because more than 3 students sometimes means that one person's doing all the work. So just a tip for you there. I have students write the claim on their own paper first. That way they can edit, they can look at their syntax and their word choice. Once they've finalized their claim though, I give them a sticky note. I like these ones that have lines on them. They do come in different sizes. I just happen to have the really large ones in the picture here. These are also really great for teacher to-do lists, by the way. So you give each student or each group of students a sticky note and they write their claim on it, and then they go and they stick it on the board where they think it belongs on the continuum. Now, it's possible that you might have 2 students write a claim that is very similar, and therefore it might belong in the same spot on the continuum, which is why you can see that we have layers on the board here. So one group put theirs on the continuum, and then the group that went second that had a very similar claim that they felt occupied the same spot. They just put it underneath. So we know that vertically, those claims are similar. And then if we go horizontally, we can see that some of the claims are much closer to little to no change, whereas other claims are more in the middle. So they might be more of a qualified response. This activity can help students practice writing a claim or a thesis. You can also use it as an opportunity for students to focus on word choice and syntax. But I think most importantly, it's an activity that allows students to see that there can be a range of claims in response to a prompt. All right, there you have it. Those are 3 relatively simple synthesis activities that you can incorporate with pretty much any synthesis prompt. If you like these activities, let me know by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. And if possible, please encourage your students to subscribe here on YouTube and also on TikTok, because I have several videos planned for the upcoming exam. Also, teacher friends, don't forget to check out the description box below. There you'll find links to different resources that will help you and also allow us to connect. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy teaching!